Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or the more comprehensive chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at Facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. Maybe that'll inspire Apple to promote us a little bit. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSPod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Okay, so the franticness and anxiety I was alluding to last week seems to have abated, even with a bunch of travel and some kind of significant deadlines ahead of me. I think part of that's because I had just a couple of really good meetings in Washington on Thursday. And then on top of that, I bumped into a senator from my state while we were waiting for the train out of D.C. Just shot the breeze with him for a few minutes while we were on the platform, and it was a nice conversation. We, had friendly hellos later in the train ride when we were passing by each other in the aisle. And I just kind of marveled again at how my life has changed these past few years, not just in terms of those frames of reference or the idea that I could actually identify one of my senators at a glance, but as I mentioned before, this show has been, part of this transformation for me. In addition to the day job and the lobbying and the different stakes my career has taken, this show has taught me how to listen. I mean, yeah, there's also how to talk, and I'm much more at ease just sitting down with legislators and their staffers and federal people at the FDA, et cetera. But what I do every week for the show has really helped me just learn more about how to hold a conversation and how to make sure I'm listening to what the other person's saying and not just waiting for them to stop talking so that I can interject and make my point known, which I think characterized a good deal of my life before this, and I really am trying to fix that. So even though the subject matter is really different in these two spheres of my life, so much of both of them are tied into the ability to just to have a conversation. Also, to do your research and do all that background work, which I have to do for both sides of this too. So I've got that going for me. Networking is also important, and I'm getting better and better about that in all these aspects of my life. But I mentioned before that I keep a mind map that shows where every podcast guest comes from. That is, like, who referred them to me. There are a lot of singletons, people I just reached out and hit up to see if they'd be on the show. But there are also a lot of people who've led to other guests. Now, Drew Friedman, one of my favorite artists, he's one of those nodes. And there are a dozen guests who have come to the show through Drew, either directly or one of the people I've interviewed through him has then led me to a few more people. And that's really fruitful and rewarding. And it also got me to sit down with his dad, the great writer Bruce J. Friedman. Anyway, this week's guest is Jerry Beck, and he's another Drew connection. I asked Drew for contacts for an L.A. trip last year, and Jerry was the first guy he thought of. We weren't able to connect for that trip, but Jerry had plans to be in New York this month, so we connected last week. Jerry's an animation historian as well as a monster movie aficionado, comics fan, with ties to the New York art scene in the 80s. So when you add all those things together, it should be pretty obvious why he and Drew know each other so well. We focus in this conversation largely on the animation side of things, but Jerry's got a lot of pop culture, a lot to talk about, I think. Now, Jerry was in New York to screen some cartoons from his collection at the Museum of Modern Art for a program called Cartoons You Won't See on TV. And it's part of the MoMA exhibition Club 57, Film, Performance, and Art in the East Village, 1978 to 1983. Now, that's running through April 1st, 2018, for those of you who are listening to this in the distant future. Jerry's screening was a one-time thing in February, but the whole exhibition sounds fascinating, so I'm hoping to hit it in the next week or two. And we talk about it at the top, so no need for me to go on about it here. Jerry has had a long career, and there are a lot of neat stories that he has. We barely scratched the surface in an hour and a half of conversation, which makes me think and hope that he's going to be on the show again, either in New York, L.A., or wherever we intersect in future. See, he's one of those guests that I wound up talking to for another hour or two after we turned off the mics, and I guess that's what other people call like a friend or something. But anyway, we had really good non-podcast conversation on top of the really fun conversation we have here. So I'm hoping that we'll stay in touch, and also hoping that this conversation will also lead to a few more notable points. Some of the people he mentions in this episode are people who I would love to sit down with and record an episode with. Anyway, I'm awfully glad Drew connected us, and I hope you dig the conversation. Now, as caveats go, Jerry tapped the table a lot. You'll pick up those little taps. Also, he had this vocal issue going on, so there's some coughing, but I deleted most of it. Now, here's Jerry's shorter bio. There's a longer one that's in the show notes for the episode, and a much more extensive one at his own website, cartoonresearch.com. Jerry Beck is a writer, animation producer, and author of more than 15 books on animation history. He is a former studio executive with Nickelodeon Movies and Disney, was instrumental in launching Animation Magazine, and has written for The Hollywood Reporter and Variety. He is currently teaching animation history at CalArts in Valencia, California, and Woodbury University in Burbank. He writes for and edits 2 blogs, Animation Scoop and Cartoon Research. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Jerry Beck. Let's start with the MoMA thing. Tell me, I know it'll be in the past by the time the listeners get to it, but I looked at it online. Tell me about the screening. It's cartoons you won't see on TV.
Yeah, well,
what is it? How did it come about? What does it mean?
Yeah, I'm in New York at the moment because I'm doing 2 shows at the Museum of Modern Art. These are unusual shows for me. I do curation of screenings all the time. I've done them in New York. I've done them in L.A. I've done them all over the world, really. And but this is an unusual one. This is a throwback to my origins. This is a throwback to when I lived in this building that we're in right now. In New York, I'm from New York, and I, at one point, was a big collector in the 1970s and 80s of 16 millimeter cartoons, TV shows, all the things I loved. This was, you got to remember, this is before the internet. It's before MeTV or Nick at Night or Cartoon Network. This is before any of that stuff. It all seemed to happen after 1980, all these things, slowly. But before that, you had to collect 16 millimeter film. That was the only way you could relive or rewatch an old TV show or a cartoon if I was studying it, which I was doing at that time. So I got invited to a club, a small venue on St. Mark's Place, 57 St. Mark's Place. It was called Club 57. Mm-hmm. And they were running old monster movies. And this is the era before Sven Gulli and Mystery Science Theater. And they were running these really offbeat.
Yeah, Zachary. So.
Yeah, we did have that. It was kind of like that.
We've always had Zachary, but yeah.
So this place, it was called Monster Movie Club, and it was at Club 57, and it was a guy with his 16mm projector in the middle of the club. It was a little bar and a bunch of seats, and it was really funky. And he was just running a black and white monster movie, and I forgot what the movie was. But when it was over, I kept thinking, I've got a projector, and I've got all these cartoons. And I went over to the manager of the bar, who's bartender as well, woman. And I told her that I had a bunch of stuff, and she said, "Oh, that's great. Would you want to run them here?" And I go, "I'd love to." Is that they split the box office or something, however it worked. And I ended up running regular monthly shows of old cartoons that I would just splice together and curate together from my collection, and then we also did every other week some old TV shows, and we called that TV Nostomania. That was what we called it. And the girl, the manager who took me on to do this, her name was Ann Magnuson.
Oh my God!
You know who that
Olympia,
is?
Yeah.
Okay. And
I was like, this is going back to performance art in the 80s, and
yes,
and yeah.
So Ann, and when I would show my TV shows. You got to understand, I'm just this guy, and I'm coming there, and I picked like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and He and She and My Mother the Car and these old 16mm prints, and I would come down, and then Anne, I remember when I walked in, I smelled what smelled like cinnamon apple pie or something was going on, and Anne was all dolled up as a 1950s mom, like Ozzie and Harriet, And she said, just show the shows and I'll introduce. I go, okay. And I just, went along for the ride, and she ended up turning my little program into a performance art. And we did this several times. She would be mom. She would give everybody in the audience milk and cookies. And in between the first film, I'd have to switch reels. She'd come out and serve TV dinners that she was cooking. She'd give everybody a free TV dinner. And it was pretty incredible. But this is what was going on at this place called Club 57. Mm-hmm. And it was quite a wild little time. But I basically, came in. I just wanted to show the films and have a good receptive audience for it. We did that. And stayed loosely in touch with Anne through the rest of her career. And I had my own little career going in my direction. And we got back in touch about 2 or 3 years ago. And then about a year ago, we heard that the Museum of Modern Art wanted to do a tribute to Club 57. Was
it one of the past attendees? Or
they went to Anne, but it was people like Keith Haring and many, I'm not going to name them right now because I'm not going to remember, but Peter Bagg and a lot of great cartoonists and artists were regular attendees or did shows there. The shows they did there were pretty creative and crazy. You can right now, I don't know when people will be listening to this, but this is February.
Soonish, yeah.
Yeah. You can, the exhibit goes on at least through April or May.
Okay.
At the Museum of Modern Art, there's an exhibit with all the flyers and video and all sorts of stuff that show what Club 57 is. And every weekend or so, they're recreating in one of their theaters downstairs a kind of a program that would be at Club 57. They're showing a lot of these bad monster movies.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is for me is that I used to do you'd do a little flyer for your show. And I would be on my apartment floor with rubber cement and cutting things out. I'd go, got some stills from my collection. I have a collection of old cartoon stills. And then I would create a little flyer and then bring it down there and put it on the wall down there. And I'm not sure where else we distributed those flyers, but I think they were distributed. I think they might have gone out with there was a monthly newsletter. And so what's funny is that 3 of my flyers that I created right here in this building are on the wall at the Museum of Modern Art. So bucket list.
Yeah. Had you ever thought you'd be on the wall?
No, I can cross that one off my bucket list that my own artwork is on the wall at the Museum of Modern Art.
I shudder to ask, but any idea what 57 St. Mark's is now?
You know, I've forgotten.
I'm going to guess it's a ramen place or something else.
No.
NYU students. But,
I don't know what it is now. You're right. I don't 100% know. It was some sort of a bar before it was Club 57, and it is something now because people have been writing about it. They're mentioning what it is, but I have to say
I'll have to take a look after we finish up. But my wife and I met at St. Mark's Books around the corner from St. Mark's itself. Oh, that was the location for our first
above
date.
it. I mean, it's street level. But you know, it's like a brownstone. So the actual building itself, you walk up the classic stairs, is a Polish church, and I believe it still is that. So I don't know what.
I got to go take a look after this now.
Yeah.
I'm completely compelled. I'm glad I gave myself
there.
extra time today. So cool. Yeah. So what brought you into animation originally?
Well,
and I know, long story, but you know. We have time.
Long story short. No, long story short. I'll try to make it short, but we can.
First cartoon that bent your brain, I guess, would be a better. And
well,
it's a Hanna-Barbera thing.
But, yes and no. You're jumping way ahead of the story. I never grew up prejudiced that cartoons and comic books were a kid's medium, which is how they're generally perceived by the general public, at least back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. I loved comic books. I drew in high school.
Superheroes, or what was the genre?
Well, what it was when I really came of age, I would just copy comic strips, you know, like Spider-Man and things like that. But when I came of age, it was like when I was 13, it was 1968. Mm-hmm. And underground comics were emerging. R. Crumb, the East Village Other, very influential on me. It was kind of like I would see what Crumb was doing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm drawing like that. Not like him, but I was doing that sort of kind of kooky thing in my own. And there's a place for it because there wasn't really before the underground. It was basically, it was basically mainstream comic books. I mean, you could be an illustrator or other things, but
there was no personal expression comics.
Right, exactly.
At that point,
And so Crumb really
Crumb at 13 would be pretty mind bending. Discovering Crumb at that age.
Yeah, 13 was my year. Those years 10 through 13 were pretty. That's when I discovered all sorts of stuff, pop culture and
bar mitzvah too, or did you not go in that
yes,
direction?
Actually,
okay, good.
My family's very reformed, but the grandparents made me read phonetically. Temple Sinai and Forest Hills.
I can transliterate just fine. Won't understand a word I'm saying, but I could figure it out. So
had to do it. But I just started. I wanted to draw. I went to SVA for a term or two, and met a lot of my friends who are now still my friends today, who are big shot animators in Hollywood. Eric Goldberg and Tom Cito and people like that, and. But the teachers there, some of which are still there, Marty Abrams is still there, would show occasionally, they'd show the students an old cartoon just to show them something. There was no history of animation class. And that was my thing. I said, oh my gosh, I love these. This is suddenly seeing these again as a teenager, coming home from school and Bugs Bunny is on. And I'm like, these are funny. I forgot how funny they are. And I love movies. I love to draw, and animation was the perfect middle ground. It was the combination of drawing and storytelling and filmmaking. And so, luckily for me, I had an epiphany in my after high school era, where I realized the old guard of animation were still animating. Animation as a business was horrifyingly bad, small, at its depths in the 70s. Nobody was hiring, and if they were hiring anybody, it was the guys who worked from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and they're still alive.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So you had to be really, really, really good. Eric Goldberg is a great Disney animator. He did the genie in Aladdin, still works for Disney right now. He had that talent in the 70s. Yeah. So you had to be that good to get the smallest job in animation. I certainly was not that good, I felt. And I suddenly got swayed by the idea of the history of animation because there was none. Again, we didn't have the internet. Yeah. We didn't have IMDb. We didn't have any books. We didn't have any references. There were a few books about Disney. So amazingly, Leonard Maltin, he had a class. I had run into his books, like the Disney films, which was a big filmography of Disney. And he did another book called The Great Movie Shorts, which was really great book and came out in like 72 or 3. It was a book that basically talked about the Three Stooges and Our Gang and Laurel and Hardy and all of these great, Robert Benchley and all of these things. And he had a filmography for each one. And I was like, that book, we need that book for animation. Mm-hmm. I went, and he had a class at the new school. It was a full college tuition class. It wasn't really open to the public. And I just said, I'm going to spend my money and go to that class. It cost, at the time, a lot of money. It was over $100.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, maybe near $200, which was a lot of money for me at that time and then for anybody. And I took the class. There were 10 people in the class. And Leonard and I became instant friends. We're still friends today.
Which is funny because he was talking so much crap about you
before
this. But
I'm sure he would. So we got to be friends, and very instantly, but in the same wavelength about what we cared about animation. The next term, he turned the class into something else. Maybe the school did, because they only had 10 enrollees. So they changed it to a class that was open to the public. It was $5 if you wanted to buy a ticket to one of the classes. And it was done in an auditorium setting. And he would lecture about certain topics. Only 6 weeks. And we got more people came to it. I ended up becoming the ticket taker for the class because I wanted to be so part of it. And constantly I was trying to convince Leonard, why you love animation. You're teaching a course about it. You did a book called The Great Movie Shorts. Why don't you do a book like that for animation? He had this attitude of, no, that's not my thing. It's not my thing to do that.
Did he feel there were other experts?
Yes.
Somebody else was more
he did.
expert?
He thought
he wasn't the expert?
Yeah, the one in particular was our good friend Michael Barrier, who had announced, he had already started doing tons and tons of interviews and research for a book he announced he was going to write and do. So Leonard purposely did not want to write another book about animation. We anticipated this great one was coming up. And some other friends did. These are all people who are now colleagues, friends of mine now. Joe Adamson did a book on Tex Avery, King of Cartoons. And my friend Leslie Cabarga, an illustrator, also did a book called The Fleischer Story, about the Fleischers. And somewhere along the line in doing this class and Barrier's book not coming out year after announcement and this and that Leonard just felt he could do it. He could do a book about it, but he needed my help. And so that was my enrollment into kind of in some ways the rest of my life, probably the best college course I ever had, which was I learned a lot. And Leonard's sort of my mentor, and he was then, of course. And I can't say I learned how to write a book, but I learned it by watching him and observing and reading. And also the researching, how to research, what to do. Out of New York, we had a lot of stuff we needed to do that was in California. When I didn't go to California, but we did a lot of it here, and we were able to find out a lot of the information. We did interviews. I would go with him on interviews, and I was his research associate on this book called Of Mice and Magic. It's still in print. It's New American Library it was originally, and the first printing was McGraw-Hill, and what's interesting about that is that in that year, it was finally finished. We did the book in the 70s. It was done literally a year before it came out. It came out in 1980. We were finished with it in 1979. Back then, it was a different world. Manuscripts. Yeah. I still remember seeing the physical manuscript. It was huge. We sent it into the editors. It took a year between it being done and it being physically in hand. And the McGraw-Hill bookstore on 6th Avenue. I think it's still there, right?
Oh, I don't know. I remember.
It's a McGraw-Hill building. It's right across the street from the Radio City Music Hall.
Yeah. And
there was a bookstore in it. And they would only be selling McGraw-Hill books. And I went in there one day at lunchtime on whatever job I had at that time. And all the books were textbooks of some sort. There was a couple of commercial books, but mainly they were textbooks. And then I would open it up and I'd say, hey, these look like the galleys they're sending us. It was like, and which was, in retrospect, first I thought that's going to be too serious. But in retrospect, I think it was the right, it was fluky because it was McGraw-Hill and they just had their own layout people. But the fact that the book looks like a textbook, I think, is what makes it kind of work.
It's actually a strength.
Yeah, it is, because people take it instantly seriously, which it is. It is a serious book about cartoons, Bugs Bunny. But the fact that it's laid out with a certain font and the way it's done, it just lends, I call it the strength of the book. It just lends to it, the visual that, we're in a real scholarly, not that it's written scholarly, but it's written in
but it's treating the subject.
Yeah, in a serious way. And I've taken that with me my entire life, whether I do blogs or anything. It's like aim up, aim high, aim serious.
Instead of some half-assed schlub from New Jersey showing up with a couple of
No.
microphones.
But you see, today I'm wearing a tie. But the thing is, I some animation people will wear wacky buttons or crazy ties or things, and it doesn't make us look good. Mm-hmm. We need to look. We're talking about a wacky subject, so we need to look straight as we can. In that regard, So did I answer your question?
Whatever it was. Okay. Yeah. You mentioned leaving SVA after a term or two. Was that based on I'm not going to be an artist given that the art I want to go into, there's no market for me?
Yes. Okay. In fact, I heard you mention Sam Gross on a previous. Sam was one of my teachers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. How was he as a teacher? Do you remember?
I don't think he was okay.
He's not a listener. It's all right.
He's not a listener. Okay, well, he wasn't so good. No, he was very much the cranky New York working cartoonist who basically would be very critical of whatever you were doing. He told you the basic things about what you should do or how he does it. And I just remember him being a cranky, not accessible guy. That's what I remember. That's my memory of him.
Yeah, that held up.
But I love his stuff.
40. Oh, yeah. No, we did, almost 2 hours one Saturday recording. And then he showed me a bunch of that week's strips that he was going to show around, or that week's gags he was going to show. I busted a gut over half of them. He's 85 years old.
Oh, my God.
Just a Zen master of gag cartooning.
He's great.
Yeah. Well, the one that killed me, it was a bunch of scientists are running out of a lab. And within the lab on a table, there's this beaker and this big microbe is climbing out with these feet. And one of them says, "Oh, thank God it's not airborne." And that's, see, just dumb, but
he is so good.
Yeah. Stuff like that. I'm like, God damn, it's a visual joke. You nail the entire thing because you make it your life. But that's what drove you out of SVA, though. Just you recognizing that going into the art form itself wasn't.
I just had this thing. I guess I have a sixth sense about things concerning myself, which is I just couldn't see it happening. I just didn't see it happening. It's your dream to be, to draw for a living. Wow. That seems like a dream come true, but I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see it for me for some reason. I didn't know what I was going to do. Actually, I just knew I wanted to be somehow involved in animation and somehow involved with movies. I was helping Leonard Maltin, at night and on weekends and even during the day. At one point, not to get too much into the weeds of my life story, but at one point I just got these jobs. I started getting just office jobs. I worked in Wall Street. I actually worked for Dun & Bradstreet and Goldman Sachs, believe it or not, just in the computer room or something. And I got this job at one point where I was working in the computer room. Don't even ask me what I was doing. I was like a clerk. And it was 24 hours. And when I say computer room, you got to understand people didn't have computers on their desks back in those days. They got reports from the computer room, that was generating
giant UNIVAC machines.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And they were generating these things at night. And I had a job at one point where the only job I can get at that point was I could work there from midnight. No, let me get this straight. It was a job. I had to go in really, really early, like 4 a.m. from Queens. And I had to be there at 6, and I worked only in the morning, and I got out at 1, which is a weird thing, but that was the way this job was set up. And because it was a 24-hour crazy thing. So I got out at 1, and it was just as I'm working with Leonard of Mice and Magic, and I'm running up to Lincoln Center where they have the Performing Arts Library, and by 2 I'm there, if not earlier. And I spent some of those nights, some of the Lincoln Center was open maybe till 8 certain nights, if not many. And where they'd close at 6. But I was there for at least 3, 4, 5, 6 hours every day, every single day, of the week, researching animation, going through old trade journals, reading every page. They had, Paramount in-house magazines, stills.
I was going to ask, is it somewhat like the Cliff Nesteroff thing with Variety being a sort of, a chronicle of the entire shebang?
Yeah, but you got to understand, Cliff has it easy because you can go online these days. And back in my day, we had to go to physical libraries that happen to have these bound volumes of old trade magazines like Variety, Motion Picture Herald, Motion Picture Exhibitor. Those were the two main ones for me. And Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Film Daily, all of these things. So it was, I was just taking notes.
Yeah, not even any microfiche back then? Just actual...
No, they did have microfiche, but no, I looked at physical things. I adopted a partner in this who's gone on to his own things. You should interview him, too. His name was Will Friedwald. Do you know that name?
No. I'll have to look him
up. You should. Will was a young guy. He was probably, I think I met him when he was 13, and I was probably 18 or something like that. And he was interested in this stuff, just as I was. I said, well, you can help me. You can tag along. So he would meet me at the library, and we'd both be, he was like an extra hand in helping me do this. We ended up, Leonard's great movie shorts, which was really the inspiration for this book, would do like a little chapter on Laurel and Hardy. And then you'd have the Laurel and Hardy shorts, and it would have the titles, and it would have the date it was released, and who directed it, and who's in it, and it would be like a one-line plot synopsis. So at least you'd know what it is. And it was done in a very concise way. That's what I was hoping and planning that this of Mice and Magic would be. Well, Leonard at one point told me we can't, and that's what Will and I would write down, we just go crazy trying to get all of the titles and the filmography of what, how many Warner Brothers cartoons were there? How many MGM cartoons? What else was there? And what were they? And who directed each one? And what was the one-line plot synopsis? I mean, this was just 4 years of crazy research, trying to find not just that, it was everything beyond that, but that was the roadmap. The filmography is your roadmap.
A skeleton for how it was going to look. Yeah.
So we started accumulating all this information. When Leonard told me there's just not, the book publisher told me it would be another 3 signatures or something if we included all these plot synopsises. So
you said, that's okay. I'll put it on the website whenever we get around to inventing the web.
Yeah. So I was a little disappointed about that. And I really wanted the Warner Brothers cartoons in particular to be out there somehow. And so Will and I separately, while we're still working on Of Mice and Magic, started compiling all the Warner Brothers plot synopsises and anything else we can figure out. And Mice and Magic came out in 1980, and around 1980, around the time it came out, we then talked to the smallest publisher in the world, still around, Scarecrow Press, which is it's one step above a vanity publishing, or today we'd say self-publishing, which is nothing's wrong with that. Yeah. But they seem to have no editor there either. That's another thing. But so we cobbled together our notes on the Warner Brothers cartoons, and we literally just sent them in. And the next thing you know, they told us, well, we'll publish this. And they sent us a little thing, and hardly any money. And they published this little dinky book with no pictures in it, but it's just basically our notes on a bunch of all the 1,000 Warner Brothers cartoons. And that's the beginning of what I call my published writing career. I was writing articles about animation and things like that. But from there, we then spent the next 5, 6, 7 years trying to get a real publisher to redo this book with pictures in the right way, the way I originally envisioned it. And we ultimately did. Henry Holt published Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies in 1988, or 89 actually. And it was authorized by Warner Brothers. I'd gotten to know the people by that point, and people like Chuck Jones and Friz Freeling, who I had met, the actual directors. Yeah. They knew what we were trying to do, and they put in good words for us. And so we got that book published, and that was like a Bible for a lot of people who loved. I remember when I was doing it, and even when it came out, I said, I don't know who this book is for, but I know I need it. Yeah. And I met all those people out there who needed it ever since.
And do you remember a first instance where, holy crap, there's an audience for this? Do you remember the first time? Oh my God, you're Jerry Beck. Did that ever?
Oh, that's happened. That's happened lately, and it's still a shock.
Freaks you every time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird. It's weird when it happens in a non place, meaning it'll happen more often at a comic book convention or it's suitable, right, or some kind of an animation festival. Yeah. It's unfortunately or fortunately, it's now happened at restaurants and coffee shops. It does in LA. So, I mean,
where everybody's an enemy. My
right.
LA consists of like 36 to 72 hours at a time. And all I do is run around interviewing people in the arts,
right.
which gives me a stilted idea of what LA is like. Although from what I gather, it's not really that different than what I'm thinking. Everybody is somehow connected to the entertainment industry, even if they're like driving a bus.
Right.
They're probably working on a screenplay. So, in that respect, I guess, again, everybody has an interest in knowing your work and who you are if they're remotely connected to animation. So.
Yeah, well, it's I've used that as as I can to do good in the world. It's my superpower.
Yeah, and mine is finding change in the In the
well, we started by talking about the Club 57 thing, and I'll tell you this since it's now long past, and that I had a great meeting today that I'll tell you about. But I was when I was first approached about, I had done shows at the Museum of Modern Art 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I hadn't done any programming there for decades now. And I kind of wanted to. I wanted to go back to doing stuff there. So I went along with this. I mean, I would have gone along with it anyway. It's part of my past. But the whole thing was so surprising. They wanted me to literally go into my garage, pull out film prints that are turning vinegar. They're deteriorating, and do a show like I would do it in the old days. Mm-hmm. And I said, it makes no sense to do that show. I said, it makes no sense for me to come up and run a bunch of 16 millimeter. Today I'm working with archives, and we're preserving and restoring these cartoons. I want you to see them in the best possible way, and not my funky old prints. But they wanted me to do this. And I said, okay, here's my artistic note, which is, instead of running them in from your screening room, put a projector in the middle of the theater, and we'll have the projector projecting the 16 with the clackety-clack noise and
the whole environment that it was like.
Yeah. And so I think at least it'll be in a context that makes sense, and I'll explain it, So I was using my superpower of my status right now and the fact that they wanted me to do this show to intentionally take a meeting with them, which I did today, which was basically to pitch them some other ideas that I wanted to do about some of the restorations, some of the great cartoons that have been lost, that have been recently found and restored and really deserve to be shown, in some context at a Museum of Modern Art kind of thing. And anyway, we had a really good meeting. Looks like that's going to happen, and I'll be back.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Are there cartoons like that you need a disclaimer for? Humor was very different then, and gender and ethnic issues.
I think you and they are disappointed that most of the cartoons I'm showing on this show aren't
offensive.
That offensive. Yeah. I think even back then I was not really running uber offensive cartoons. It was just a line to get people to come in. Sure. Also, keep in mind that they don't run any of these cartoons on TV anymore anyway.
Right.
They only run Tom and Jerry. I'm not showing any of those.
And that was what I grew up on in the throughout the 70s. And even then there was these are the weird 60s modernist ones versus like the 50s, right. More lush but lifeless ones. Right. And it was, as a little kid, seeing those different types and realizing, oh, these are the ones I like. These are the ones that are crap. Exact same characters, but, something happened in the animation that turned into weird
animation evolved, but maybe not to your liking. But no, these are just great old cartoons that I happen to like that are in my collection. Good. Is really all it is. The Paramount cartoons, famous studios, the people did Baby Huey, and I'm going to show a Bugs Bunny and things like that. Anyway.
Preservation.
Yes.
It's a big part of, it's part of what you're involved in now. What was the movement like to, again, get that respectability for cartoons and have people understand that these things need to be saved, preserved, and restored? Was that an uphill fight at all, or was that sort of tied into we've done the book, we're building credibility for cartoon? Were you part of a preservation movement, I guess?
Well, there's a preservation movement going on now for sure. And it's still a movement, and it still needs champions. There's a world. There's a world. In a world. There is a world of people who preserve film. They generally work at the Museum of Modern Art, the Library of Congress, UCLA Film and Television Archive, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Eastman House in Rochester, and archives around the world. They have limited budgets, and film is going. And if you're going to save film, you're going to save top-line features.
Right.
You're going to get donations from Martin Scorsese and others who are going to give it to you to save
the thing
those major things that they think are worth saving. The archives themselves are going to save newsreels, and documentary footage. Again, key features, Laurel and Hardy. I have no problem with any of that. But guess what I didn't mention? Cartoons. Cartoons are at the bottom of the barrel with these people. Nothing against these people. A lot of them actually do understand. They just don't have the budget or money or whatever. And there's not that many people out there saying, yeah, gotta save this. Right. Well, I'm one of those guys. I'm definitely one of those guys. I mean, they'll say we've got this collection of we have the Terry Toon Library. This is true. This is an actual thing. This is at UCLA Film Archive. Paramount Pictures owns these old Terry Toons. Now, here's the deal. Terry Toons was the bottom of the barrel. Yeah. You know, Disney is up on the top, and then you got your MGMs and your Warner Brothers. All the way down at the bottom is Terry Toons. Studio that was in New Rochelle because they couldn't afford the Manhattan rent in 1940, you know. And they amazingly did create characters like Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll and others. And Paramount, who owns them, sees no monetary value in spending $10,000 or more, or even $25,000 per title to preserve,
right,
to make ready for high def. They have no market for, especially they don't have a market for the, you know, a couple of hundred they made in black and white in the 30s.
Sure.
So right now, at this moment that I'm speaking to you, my group, I'm the president of a company. No, I'm the president of ASIFA Hollywood, ASIFA. That's an international animation organization that was founded back in the early 60s by key animators around the world. It was a way for animation people to link together and group. This is all before the internet. And we in LA, with the LA branch, we do this thing called the Annie Awards, which is very notable in LA. It's kind of the forerunner of the, you know, what might be picked for best animated cartoon for the Oscar, and we also give for best short and best commercial and best animator and best director. And as part of that group, it's a nonprofit group. We raise a lot of money, and we give back. We have scholarships and other things, but we also preserve film. And I get to sit there and go, let's spend some of our money this year on saving this and saving that. Now, at this exact moment, we're working on, I've selected 3 Terry Toons from that archive to preserve. One of them is the first one, the very first one from 1930. And the other 2 have also valid reasons for preservation without getting into it.
But the rest of your board is just rolling their eyes, like, really? Terry Toons?
A little bit. They trust me. They trust me. But some of them are like, really? Yeah. But it's important that somebody do it because nobody is. I've just found out that that very first one it's all shrunken, and a lot of extra care and money has to be put into it to actually preserve it. But we've got to do it. We've got to do it, or nobody's going to do it. Mm-hmm. So,
you're talking to the guy who spends his evening and weekends doing this. So
yeah, no, I know where you're coming from. I mean, a few years ago, literally 10, 20 years ago, I was talking to my friends at UCLA about there's these two-reelers that's extra length cartoons that aren't 7 minutes. Mm-hmm. Fleischer did several of these with Popeye. They did Popeye Meets Sinbad, and then those are extra-length Popeye cartoons. Those have been preserved by Warner Brothers, who owns them today, and they're out beautifully on DVD, and you can see the beautiful preserved version of those. But Fleischer did 2 other ones. That one of them's with Raggedy Ann and Andy, and the other one is a oddball telling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, done kind of tongue-in-cheek. And nobody cares about these. The Raven, unfortunately, is not a great cartoon, and people who've seen bootleg prints or old faded red prints of it are like, yeah, that one's not so good. So thus, nobody has any interest in preserving these. So luckily years ago, I had started the ball rolling on that. And a few years ago when I got in the position I am now with the CIFA, we were able to complete the job. So we have now preserved those films. Those are just two of, I'm just telling you of a couple of the many that we're doing. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time.
Is there a Holy Grail one that's missing?
It's funny you say that. There were a lot of Holy Grails. Some of them have been turned up in recent years. There's a show that I just pitched to the Museum of Modern Art and to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in LA. And I think we're going to be doing this eventually. So here's a plug for something that doesn't exist yet. But maybe if somebody's listening to this podcast in the future, it'll be coming up. Mm-hmm. But I have a show in my mind called Animation Lost and Found. And the subtitle of it is recent, let's see if I remember this right, recent restorations of animation's holy grails. And what it is, it came about this way. You'll enjoy this little story. It came about this way. You've heard of CinemaScope, and you've heard of 3D movies. And you know how in the 1950s those came to be. They actually existed before that, but they came out big in the 1950s to grab people away from staying home and watching television. Right. Okay. There was another wacky gimmick that was tried. Can you guess what it is?
I remember Smell-O-Vision, but I nailed it.
That's it. You nailed it. Smell-O-Vision. They made at least one movie, if not two, but they made one, Descent of Mystery, which was recently preserved. Yeah. And it was made in 70 millimeter. And when it was initially shown in roadshow attractions in 70 millimeter, it also played with a Smell-O-Vision cartoon directed by John Hubley, who's a major animation director. One of the key principal people behind the UPA studio in the early 50s. Now, this was the late 50s, and he's doing freelance. He's winning Oscars for his independent films in the late 50s, and he is contracted to make a 70 millimeter Smell-O-Vision cartoon. And by the way, a lot of you are thinking, I haven't read about this in the history books. This is one of those things that's never been written about. Yeah. So people like me who knew about it were like, where is it? You know, because it was never shown on television, because it was not part of a package of a whole bunch of other cartoons.
Never circulated.
Because it was shot in 70 and never circulated in 16 millimeter, because it was in Smell-O-Vision and it makes no sense without the smells. It was never shown anywhere else. So where is this thing? Does it exist? Where's the negative? Well, we still don't know where the negative is, but a couple of years ago, the Academy was going through its archives, as they periodically do, trying to figure out what films they have with mystery, question marks on them. They came across a 70 millimeter reel that was marked cartoon. They didn't know what it was. They showed it to me and a few other friends. And we said, oh my God, this is the Smell-O-Vision cartoon. So it's been restored.
Is there any code along with it to say which smells?
No, but you can tell.
Okay.
You can tell.
Okay.
I won't go into it. It's pretty gross. But, it's been restored, and I want to show it. I want people to see this thing. And I first thought, as a curator, I thought, well, what kind of program do you put this on? Because you can't just show it. It's actually longer than normal. It's like 15 minutes long, but it's not long enough. You could even have a panel with it, maybe with Emily Hubley, John Hubley's daughter. You could figure out, so even then it will only come out to 45 minutes or something. I need to create a 90-minute program or a 2-hour program. So I came up with this idea because this was a lost holy grail. And I thought of a few others that I could think of that have been found recently that this would make a show. And so I'm going to try to do this at the Museum of Modern Art. I'm going to try to do this with the Academy out in California. And I think if you keep your ears open and listen for it, I think it'll be quite an eye-opening thing. In California, they were saying, the show is great, but it's not sexy enough. I'm like, what do you mean?
The 80s? Go on.
Right. No, it's like they got to sell seats. They got to bring people in. It's hard to get people to come to a movie theater these days. So I said, well, what'll make it sexy? A lost Betty Boop cartoon? He goes, well, that would help. I go, well, I have one.
Nice.
And I pulled one out. And so I can make the show work. And
or you can go forge one. You can make a fake one that everybody will think.
There you go.
Because I'm all about the illicit ways of doing this stuff. It reminds me a lot of a past guest who also, through several rounds, is connected to me through Drew Friedman. Ben Modell, silent movie accompanist, lives in the Upper West Side, because he gets called by the Smithsonian periodically with, "We got these silent clips. We have no idea who this is and what. Can you help us?" And he's actually built these compilations around that. I
mean, there are Holy Grail animations out there that are just like lost pieces, whether they're clips or complete films. But it's right now the list is smaller than ever. And let me also say that most of those ones that are lost aren't missed. Meaning, they're once you find them, that you find out, oh yeah, okay, it's not that great, but I found it, I finally saw it. Or it's just some miscellaneous piece. What I'm excited about is the stuff that I never knew about. I mean, I knew about A Tale of Old Whiff, by the way, is the name of that. By the way, it's narrated by, it's voiced by Burt Lahr.
Yeah.
The Cowardly Lion. Right. He's the main voice in it. There was a film that we didn't even know existed that was made that just popped up at the Library of Congress. It's a Skippy cartoon. Skippy was a very famous comic strip character of the early 30s, late 20s, made into a live action movie with Jackie Cooper. Very famous.
Coogan?
Cooper.
Okay.
Jackie Cooper made a movie called Skippy. You can look it up. I think it's an MGM picture. And it was just very, very, very popular in that era. And when United Artists lost the rights to distribute Disney shorts, the Disney shorts were going to RKO, who had said, "We'll distribute these shorts and your crazy idea to make a feature." So they went with RKO. UA was looking to continue releasing shorts, and they made a deal with a producer of No Note, who got a crew together, and they bought the rights to Skippy, and they started making a Skippy cartoon. It was announced in the trades, full-page advertisements. United Artists is going to release Skippy cartoons next fall, and it never came out. Nobody even knew. It didn't exist.
Yeah.
The Library of Congress recently found it. Classically, we found this, we see what it says, what it is, but
does anyone know what this
why
means?
Isn't this written about anywhere?
Yeah.
Because we didn't know it existed. So it's been restored, and that'll be part of our show, amongst many other unbelievable things.
I'm looking forward to a show that doesn't exist.
It doesn't even exist yet. No, it's easy to pull together if they just give me the go-ahead, which they will.
How's animation transformed? You've been in this 40 plus years. How do you characterize the state of the art versus the state of the commerce of it? What do you see in terms of 40 years of?
It's on the purely aesthetic level of the art. It's progressing nicely. It's going along in ways that I would have maybe predicted in some ways, but I'm a little disappointed it hasn't surpassed what I thought. Meaning I would like to see even more and more wilder things done. Animation keeps getting stuck in ruts.
There was a stretch of trying to be photorealistic in terms of the humans. Which
you're talking about you're talking about today's rut. Yeah, the rut right now is the commercial perceptions that hand drawn animation the way it used to be is not something the mass public would go see, and that's why all of these major studios, Pixar and Disney and all these other ones are doing these CG movies. And that seems to an outsider, that's where animation is today. You need to look at the independent films.
Yeah.
And
I remember plotzing when the Book of Kells came out.
Secret of Kells.
Secret of Kells. Yeah, just having that. It can look like this again. That's
it's going on. And as a teacher, as a professor now at Cal Arts and at Woodbury University in California, and as a person living in California right now, every college out there, every single one, UCLA, USC, Loyola Marymount, I can name the whole list. They all have huge animation programs. And I find that to be true even everywhere else in the United States. Mm-hmm. Animation is a big thing. And what's cool is the students aren't just looking at the movies that are coming out. In fact, they because they grew up with that stuff, it's sort of passe. They're a little too much into anime or a little too much into the kind of what I call the Cartoon Network style, but
It's a Bigfoot.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yes, it is. Yeah, Bigfoot style cartooning, which is great. But there are definitely some great talents emerging. So going to the independent festivals, going to in LA, they have student film showcases. All the schools rent a big theater, and you can go see all the best ones that they've done, and they're just fantastic films that they're making today. It's not like when we were younger and the idea of watching a student film was a nightmare.
God. Yeah.
Today, it's quite a pleasure. And again, it's all around the world. So there's some really, really great stuff. The access to equipment, the computer, the home computer, and programming, makes it easier for more voices and more styles to emerge. One thing I tell students is that, we each have our own handwriting. And, if I told everybody in this class to make a film about a cat chasing a mouse, they'd be completely different, each one of your films, because you have your own style, your own point of view. And that's how many different...
It always makes me think of that Simpsons episode where they lose the rights to Itchy and Scratchy and they get the Eastern European version.
Right.
What the hell is this? Yeah, it's with Capitalist and Parasite. Or Worker and Parasite.
Yeah. I mean,
but go on.
The thing about animation history is that it's filled with opportunities for advancement and progression that aren't taken. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't.
How so?
Well, one of my best examples of that is Yellow Submarine. We all grew up and watched that, right?
On New Year's Eve. It was always shown on, well, I was too young for that, but, it was still trippy.
I mean, it was trippy, and it was in some ways, people say, well, wasn't that influential? No, it wasn't actually. Can you name a film like Yellow Submarine, not counting TV commercials or something, but
the actual feature.
Who was inspired by that film to then make something like it, at least for 10 or 15 or 20 years after it? The flip side of that is Fritz the Cat, which Ralph Bakshi made, came out in 71 or 2, based on R. Crumb. That started a whole new industry of adult cartoons. Yeah. And Ralph immediately followed up. There was a 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat. Animation went dark with things like Watership Down. Even Disney did The Black Cauldron, a horrible film, but but they were all they were going dark, and that started with Fritz the Cat, actually. There's these little trends that happen in animation. Right now we're in this CG trend, although we're breaking out of it in a way that I like. A lot of current CG, the directors and things are purposely breaking the mold. What I mean by that is, not to put anything down, it's going to sound insulting. I don't mean it to at all. I loved Frozen. Okay, I loved it, but the mold is frozen. What I mean by that is that that's the typical princess CG movie of today. Mm-hmm. But you get things like Hotel Transylvania and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, even Inside Out, where the directors are purposely doing more cartoony things. Cartoony. They're not trying to be photorealistic. And that's a great trend. I can see that. I love where that might go.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you talk about kids, these goddamn kids today,
yes,
being too anime influenced, or having a little too much anime influence, do you feel responsible at all? Apparently, you were one of the early importers.
I'm both responsible and proud.
Okay, I was going to ask then. Do you feel good about it? But
I do, in a weird fatherly way.
Well, how did it come about initially?
Oh boy, there's one of those Jerry Beck stories.
Okay,
no.
Well, but it was late 80s, though, right?
Yeah. Okay. In the late 80s, I had a company called Streamline Pictures. We distributed Akira and some of the Miyazaki films like Castle in the Sky and Totoro. And we dubbed Kiki's Delivery Service. I grew up in Flushing, Queens, and I believe it is still very Asian in Flushing these days. But when I was there, it wasn't. But there were Japanese bookstores, and I had lots of Asian classmates. And I find that in retrospect to be incredibly fortunate. I didn't realize how fortunate I was because not everywhere was like this. But what was great for me was I remember one day going, it was actually camp, but I could say school, but I was going to camp, and a fellow Japanese student of mine, a classmate, was sitting across from me reading an Astro Boy comic book. At least I knew the character as Astro Boy. you know, but it was it was manga, but I didn't know what manga was.
Yeah.
But I saw the cover of it, and my brain went, oh, so that's Japanese. It wasn't like he was reading a Japanese version of an American thing. Yeah. It just suddenly hit me that cartoon character is Japanese. That explains Kimba the White Lion and Gigantor and Eighth Man and all these things that used to run on Channel 11. Drew will appreciate that. PIX, yeah. And so
Channel 9 for your monster movies. But go on.
Absolutely. Yeah. They had Ultraman. I was aware of these Japanese. I ended up going into one of the Japanese bookstores as a kid and finding some of these manga compilations of what I now know are Tezuka. I still have them, Osamu Tezuka's work, and realizing this is great stuff, even though I can't read it. This is really cool looking artwork, and I just was aware of it. Now, cut to about 10 years later, I was running 16 millimeter films at comic book conventions. This is back again, pre-video days, pre-internet days. If you went to a comic book convention, a Comic-Con in New York back in the early 70s.
You would see Ben Catcher dressed as a Blue Beetle.
I would have.
Yes. That's apparently there was a photo of Ben when he was a kid in cosplay.
Well, I've been going to those conventions, Phil Seuling's convention, since 1968 when he started doing it.
I try and tell my wife that there used to be a New York Coliseum, or the convention center right at Columbus Circle.
Well, it wasn't there. You got to remember that conventions back then were 300 people.
Yeah, true.
400. They were in the Statler Hilton. They were at the Penn Hotel Pennsylvania. You know, that's and they were very, very small, but they were great for me. They were like, wow, this is another world. This is so fantastic. And ultimately, because of my collection, just like I mentioned with the Club 57 thing, I went to Phil and I said, I have a collection of films and Batman episodes and things like that, and I can run them here. And he said, okay, you know, so he let me, you know, run the film room for a while. And at these conventions in the 70s, I started seeing manga would pop up, and there was some interest in Japanese animation. I went to New York City, local Manhattan Toho offices, and I said, is there any way you guys could rent us some of those giant robot shows, those great Mazinga and things? And well, we have. They were very cooperative. They loaned me.
You want this? You know,
they were like that, yeah. And they said, well, you only have them in Japanese, no subtitles. I said, I don't care. Yeah. So, but they were mint prints. I still remember they were mint. The color was gorgeous. And I ran these at comic book conventions in New York, and people went nuts. They couldn't understand what the characters were saying, but it was like animation we hadn't seen. It was TV animation, but it was adventure animation in a way that they don't do it here in America. And so I've always been aware of this, what I call underground for Japanese animation. Now, when VHS came in, when the home video started in the late 70s, early 80s, there was trading between Japan. They had VHS, they had NTSC like we did. And there was a trading thing going on. We could see more and more of this stuff. And I actually was part of some of the Japanese fan clubs and things. And that was just part of my DNA. And I will now edit this story to a long story short. When I moved to L.A., I was involved with some animation festivals right off the get-go when I got to L.A. And I was involved with the guy running it was like, find whatever you can find. I'm like, well, I found this film called Castle in the Sky, which is now a celebrated film by Hayao Miyazaki, which was brand new at the time. This is 1987 or so, 86, 87. And we showed that. We ran this in this festival. And in advance of the festival, I talked to the guy who was running it. I said, this is the only one that's sold out in advance. Everything else we're showing, the computer animation program, the latest film, Brave Little Toaster was a brand new film. We were world premiering it. Great film John Lasseter worked on, a hand-drawn film. Based on a novella by Thomas Dish. I heard you mention him on a previous.
He was on last week. Well, we had a guy who was good friends of his last week on the show.
Oh, okay, there you go. I just wanted to,
Oh, yeah, no, I'm good with science fiction references to everything.
Science fiction references. Yeah. The guy who was running it, we were distributing, I was working for him, and we were distributing animation programs to theaters of shorts. And I said, if I were us, I would pick up this Japanese film as a distribution because I know there's an audience. I already know from my own history, there's an audience for this. And he looked at me like, you're out of your mind. This is a TV cartoon. We're not going to pick this, soil our dignity with this Japanese cartoon. And so a long story short, I about 2 years later, I got together with a guy who had been doing some dubbing, leaving a lot of the story out. And we went to the people who could not sell this movie in the United States to anybody for any reason, for any money. And they had offices in L.A. All the Japanese animation companies unbelievably had offices in L.A. Huh. I did this Japanese animation company for 4 or 5 years, and I never had to leave L.A. Everybody, every Japanese, they were all there. So we went up, me and my partner went up, and I had already been in film distribution for a while. We left that part of my life out. But I'd been filmed in this film distribution, and we went up and fronted ourselves as two guys who could get these movies in movie theaters. And here's how it'll work for you. We'll give you half the cut of whatever the box office is, and you can take all the reviews we're going to get and the billboarding that we're doing in theaters and sell it to home video. And that's where you'll make your money. And they said, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And so they let us have the film practically for free to distribute. So we got all these movies, these great Japanese animation movies to distribute and make money off of and make them happy, and they were. And so that's how I got into that
and business. Feel somewhat culpable, but at the same time, it was a good thing. You cross cultures, you brought. Well,
it was really, really a great experience, and it was great to do it. I did feel like, I came back here to New York. We opened Akira at the Film Forum, and we got the filmmaker, Katsuhiro Otomo, to come to New York in person. And he did a book signing at Forbidden Planet, and we had him in front of did a Q&A with him at the Film Forum. And that's one of those experiences I'll never forget. And the thing is, it was packed. It was crowded. Akira is a milestone film. It's really stood up. It's X years later. It came out in 88, whatever, how many years this is, 30 years.
The comic in translation.
Yeah.
Marvel
89. Marvel printed that.
That was,
Epic,
right? And that was 88, 89. So.
Yeah. And the thing is, and we got plugs. If you look back at those old comic books, in some of the issues in the middle, you'll see there's a little plug for where it's playing in what movie theaters.
Yeah.
That was me talking to the editor. Could you put this in? We booked them way in advance so it would come out in the comic book.
Yeah, a 3 or 4 month lag and all that stuff.
Yeah. But it was important to get these things out. Akira has, like I say, stood the test of time. It's still the benchmark or touchstone or whatever word you want to use for Japanese anime. I don't know if it's improved that much since. It was going in that direction from the 60s, 70s into the 80s to Akira, and it's pretty much leveled at that for the most part. There's some great artists who have made films, throughout and since, but
Yeah, that was the peak.
Yeah.
Cool. Might be a sensitive question to ask, but what did your parents make of all this? Well, I just wish you'd stop watching cartoons. Was that a thing?
Well, no, my dad, who's still with us, thank God, he's in Brooklyn.
Which is sort of with us. Go on.
He would appreciate that. He was a great guy who was Mr. Optimistic and didn't understand what I was into, but didn't care. It was like, you're doing your thing and you're happy and all that. My mom was more the strict person. She's not with us anymore. And really thought I was wasting my time. The classic, I should be a doctor or something else,
My son, the doctor, is drowning.
Exactly.
I always have to throw that out. Yeah.
Just thought it was kind of just nonsense. And she lived long enough to see some of my first books come out, and I think toward the end she got it. She was like, "Okay, you've figured it out on your own. You just figured it out, and understood." So
yeah. Is there someone you missed out on interviewing? Is someone just if we'd gotten to this guy 6 months earlier?
I attended Tex Avery's funeral. That sounds like the title of a men's magazine. No, it doesn't.
Weasels rip my flesh.
Right, exactly.
Tex Avery's funeral.
Right. I attended Tex Avery's funeral. That's a National Enquirer kind of a story. No, I would consider him somebody I missed because I was in it. I was into it. I was totally involved. But my friends like John Canemaker and Joe Adamson and Mike Barrier, they interviewed him. I have a lot of friends who worked with him in his last years at Hanna-Barbera. Tex would have been my favorite person to interview who I could have. Flip side, though, I did get to meet many great people. Chuck Jones.
You were coming up at a period where they weren't, in their 80s or anything. These guys were still.
Yeah. I am very proud of the fact that I was friends and got to be friends with Bob Clampett, and I'm still friends with his family today. But that's, I could say that about the Chuck Jones family and the Friz Freleng family. And I'm very happy that I got to meet all of them and interview them and get to know them. And it was quite a privilege. I've also gotten in the last 20 or so years, gotten to meet a lot of the supporting players, meaning the people who don't get the credit, the inkers and painters and other subsidiary artists who, some of which, very few now, are still alive, but who were alive within the last 20, 30 years. And to hear their story, is really good too, because you hear the story of animation from another point of view, from a person who isn't Chuck Jones.
Yeah, everybody in between, literally the in-betweeners.
The in-betweeners, right?
Yeah.
Good line.
Yeah. Well, how difficult is it was it back then to even find those people? Were they credited particularly, or was it you could identify certain styles or was it just things that came out of
a lot of the animators were credited. The smaller, the inkers and painters and things.
That's
like
what
that.
I wonder. Or did some of them? How did you find those guys, basically?
You know what it is? It's always. I'm trying to think right now. How would I have found that? The best story I can tell you is my relationship with Martha Goldman Sigel. I was doing my Japanese animation distribution. I had out several books about Warner Brothers cartoons by that point. And one day I got a phone call out of the blue from this older lady, and she was telling me how she was collecting all of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and she found reference to my Japanese animation company in one of my books as part of about the author. And she just decided to look up and find where that was and then to call me. And she did. Yeah.
Again,
and
pre-internet, but go on. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I found out by talking to her that the thing I found first that was amazing was that she had like 900 of the 1,000 Warner Brothers cartoons on VHS.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, how did you do this? She was taping things off the air. She was buying all the videotapes and this and that. She only had 100 more to go. And I said, you know what? I'm going to help you. And I wanted to help her selfishly because again, you got to understand, nobody had all the Warner Brothers cartoons in their own hands, So I liked the idea that not only did she have it, but I could access it or even get a copy of it for myself. So I went out of my way and gladly to contact other film collectors, people who collected it on film, and anywhere, calling and figuring out and getting transfers made of all the ones she didn't have. And ultimately she completed her collection. And I felt like I completed my collection. Mm-hmm. So we ended up becoming very good friends. She was one of the inkers and painters at Warner Brothers back in the 30s. Worked for MGM in the 40s, and had been inking and painting freelance on Peanuts specials and things like that ever since. And we had a great relationship. We'd go out to eat all the time, her and her husband. We became like family. It was she was really something. She was like the co-editor of the in-house Warner Brothers Leon Schlesinger newsletter. So she had copies of these rare 1930s newsletters that told you who everybody was at the studio. And she would have parties where whoever was still alive would come over. And she knew all of them personally. She knew Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett and Tex Avery as friends, not even as a boss, just as friends. And so she had these great stories. And I urged her to write all of this down. Long story short, she has a book called Living Life Inside the Lines. I think that's the name of it. Yeah. Martha Sigel, published by, I think, University of Mississippi Press. Anyway, I goaded her into that. I helped her find the publisher, and I wrote the introduction for her book. And And she passed away a few years ago. In fact, one of the last things she did, I got her to be on as many of the audio commentaries. I would do these audio commentaries for the DVDs, 10, 15 years ago. And I got her on camera at one point, and we did a lot of identifications of who did this and who did that and who that is. And I even got her on got her on History Detectives. You know that show?
No.
Oh, you don't know it?
No, because I'm selective in how much time I.
Well, this is on your lofty PBS channels.
Oh, okay, cool.
There was a great show. I think it may still be on. I'm not sure. Called History Detectives, and it's a bit like a reality show where somebody will find an odd item, and
what does this mean?
What is this? And then the detectives they have like 5 of them. They'll have 4 different segments in each episode, and they'll go out and try to find out what this is. And they called up one day, and they had this. What it was a cell from Buddy. Buddy was the character in between Porky, who's after, and Bosco, who most people don't remember either. Before that, at Warner Brothers, Buddy lasted about a year. He was their star, and nobody knows who he is.
That's a big part of the Ben Modell thing. Like when he brings up like Marcel Perez and people like that, it's like this. You have to understand, this guy was the number 2 funniest man in the world, and no one knows who he is now because he was number 2 80 years ago or 90 years ago.
Wow.
So, it's things like that where it's a really weird episode I did because it sounds sort of dry on the surface, but I always tell people like that's the one that's all about like what audience building means, what the transitoriness of reputation is, in similar vein to what you've been talking about, the things that. Like Skippy, also these things mattered. They were huge, and just
Well, Buddy was a star for a fleeting moment. I do not recommend anybody seeing any Buddy cartoons. Unlike the second biggest, he was just the second in the line of. So they found this cell, and they didn't know what it was, and they came to me, and I said, well, I know what it is. I even know what cartoon it's from. So they ended up, if you ever see it, it's online. You can see the segment. It's really fun. They built, they kind of made this segment up after they understood what it was. They
figured
not a whole lot
here, but let's add something.
Right. Yeah. So what was great was I connected them to Martha, who in theory could have inked it herself or painted it herself back in those days. She was there during that period. And so they actually had on that segment an actual inker from somebody who might have done that. And we actually went to a movie theater. And we screened a print of the film, and we stopped it right where the cell was, so we could we did it that way. And Martha passed away within the year, I think, or a year or 2 after that segment aired. So that was her last appearance, and she was just a bundle of energy. She was in her 90s, and she was just a great, great person.
Book you're proudest of the books you've done, as opposed to books you've read.
Well, I'm proudest of.
Is Mice and Magic?
Well, I don't. That's Leonard's book. I like to call that Leonard's book. Okay. I was involved with it, but I don't count that at all as a book that I wrote. Right. I was standing there literally while he was writing it, and we conferred while he was writing it. But I'm proudest of the Warner. I'm proudest of the second version of the Warner filmography book of Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, a complete illustrated guide to the Warner Brothers cartoons, because it was a breakthrough at the time. It was something that was needed. Everybody in the universe who's bought it back in the old days, has come up to me and said, that was my Bible. I love this book, blah, 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 blah. I similarly, I did a book not as celebrated about 12 years ago called The Animated Movie Guide, which is a listing of all animated features. It was one of those things born from the same place, which is, I need this. I don't know who else needs it, but I need a book that tells me all of the animated films in one place. And believe it or not, I don't think, I could be wrong, somebody out there will write in, but I don't even think you can go to IMDb. If you went to IMDb and you just plugged in animated features, you'd get a list with thousands of titles. And it's in alphabetical order, and it's from films from Japan and from all over the world. This book has a very, it's very much, what's the right term?
I say constrained, but in a good way.
Yeah.
It has parameters.
It has parameters. I talk about at the beginning what those parameters are. Basically, it's you released in the United States. has to have played in a movie theater. You know, I have all these little rules for what I constitute an animated feature.
Yeah.
You know, because you can break every one of those rules, and there's lots of examples that don't fit into that. I did a book called The 50 Greatest Cartoons that a lot of people have come back to me about and like a lot. That was a heartbreaker for me.
How so?
I was really writing a real book about the 50 greatest cartoons. We had done a poll with animators and historians and movie reviewers, and we got back this consensus of this is in 1993 or 4, of what were the 50, greatest that we can highlight in this book. And it's for this publisher, and they want it to be an art book. They want it to be
sort of coffee table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They totally tear it apart, rip it apart. And the book that has come out is the book they wanted. And I look at it and my heart breaks. And when the book first came out, I was bad-mouthing it to everybody. But then I learned later that a lot of people love it. They just love it for what it is. Yeah. They don't know
what it could have been.
They don't know what I was doing and what it could have been. Yeah. So I literally, a year, 6 months, 8 months later, I had to shift my brain and just shut up about why it didn't work and just smile and take the compliments for why they like it. And
I had the same thing with the Barry Blitt episode. I'm kidding. Go on.
Oh. So, it turned out to be a great book that people love, but it's not what I planned it to be. 50 Greatest Cartoons.
I was afraid the idea was that, there was a overlooked movie or overlooked cartoon that you didn't include. When you said it was disappointing, I was afraid it was.
No.
Oh my God, how could we forget the Citizen Kane?
Yeah, no. I at the back of the book I added something another 50 that could.
Yeah,
have
of course.
Been.
That's what we always have to do with any of these.
Yeah, Yeah.
What is the number one?
What's Opera Doc?
Okay,
a Chuck Jones.
I'm just
cartoon.
making sure. That's.
Okay. Oh, you were just making sure.
I'm glad that's.
Yeah.
It's up there, along with the I forget the title of it. The duck season, wabbit season. Duck season. Yeah,
that's one of the early. Yeah,
Throwdown Trouble. Yeah, that's
Rabbit Fire. Yeah, Rabbit Seasoning. Yeah, one of those.
Yeah, it did feel like they would occasionally just do the same thing with every couple of years and.
Well, we call it the Hunter trilogy. That's what we call there's three that are just like that.
Yeah. Now, let me ask about teaching.
Yes.
Did you ever think you were going to be a university professor? Same way you didn't think your work was ever going to be in MoMA. And what, it'll sound weird, what assumptions did you have to make about what students would be bringing into a class? I'm assuming you knew that you knew a lot of stuff, but that process of having to figure out how to convey that to students?
Yeah, these are all good questions. Let's take them one at a time. What was the first part of that?
You never thought you were going to be a teacher because you were a disappointment to your family.
That's all true.
But the assumptions you had to make and the process of building a syllabus or a curriculum for these kids.
Yeah. I never thought I was going to be a teacher. In fact, I had teaching and lecturing throughout my career, but I never thought about it full time. I never thought there was even a job for that. I thought that was just another thing. It wasn't. It wasn't for me. And the idea, and the few academics that I did know, and some of them are good friends of mine, I wasn't into it that much. My attitude about cartoons are they're fun. I love them. They're to be enjoyed. They're not to be ripped apart and thesised and whatever the right word is about that, where you pull it apart and study it. That wasn't my thing. I was more interested in how it came to be than. What does it mean?
And the signifiers and semiotics and all that craziness.
Right.
Yeah.
So I never gave that any thought. And what happened was I backed into it. I feel it's the luckiest thing that ever happened to me is that I fluked into being a professor. I was asked to take over. Actually, every time I've ever been doing this, I took over for John Canemaker in the 90s. He was on sabbatical or something one year. So he asked me if I could do his class for the year. And I did it. And I enjoyed doing it, but I had no thought to ever do that again. So I was asked to take over a class in L.A. At the school, Woodbury. because they had somebody, and that person ended up going to another school, and then they had somebody else. Another person went off to another school. So somebody thought, hey, Jerry Beck knows this stuff. Why don't you have him come in? He's not a teacher, but he knows it.
Yeah.
And I had done so many shows and lectures and introductions to programs before that I felt like teaching was almost a kind of a variant of that. But this is where we hit your other question. I learned really quickly, in a way, how to create the syllabus by doing the class, even though I had to have a syllabus in advance, which I did. But I learned more by doing the class. I foolishly thought everybody was my age and that everybody knows.
They all had the background.
Right. They all know Bugs Bunny, watch it on TV all the time. You do this. And then I suddenly realized we're in the 21st century. They all grew up with the Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy, and they don't know anything about the older cartoons. They don't know, not only that, they don't know who Chuck Jones is. They don't know who Max Fleischer is. They don't know who Winsor McKay is. They don't know any of this. And as soon as I became aware that they didn't know this, well, on the one hand, it made my job easier. On the other hand, it made me feel like this is the most important thing I can do with my life. This is my way of passing this along. Mm-hmm. Because also, I'm going to blow their minds. They don't know what I'm going to show them, and they're going to flip out. At least I thought they were, but I will tell you, spoiler alert, it does. It flips them out. They can't believe what they're seeing, because they only know what they've been seeing in the last 20 years. So, what I realized is I'm into the obscurities, the holy grails, the weird stuff, the fringe animators. But I'm realizing I can't do that.
You can't go straight there. You have to take them along the
they've never seen Steamboat Willie. They've got to see Steamboat Willie. They've got to see Gertie the Dinosaur. They have to see What's Opera Doc. They have to see, and then as soon as they started making up the list of what they have to see for every topic, there's no room for the other stuff. Yeah. They've got to see these things. When I was in high school, when I was in 6th grade, we used to have these 40-minute periods.
Yeah.
Right. And one year, I think it was the last year of high school, maybe. 6th grade?
No, it's 12th.
12th grade.
Yeah.
Well, it was something like, I don't know what it was, but it was, yeah. One of my later years in high school, I was left back a lot. So one of my later years.
Too much time watching cartoons?
Just joking.
Yeah.
We had an English class, and when I went to this class, and practically it's the only class I can still remember from high school at all. I went to this class, and I don't even remember the guy teaching anything. We would watch a reel 40 minutes long, because that's how big the reels were, that he rented. We'd watch a reel of a movie every class, and the classes were every day. Yeah. So it was every day at
1:30. It was
right, 1:30. We'd have 40 minutes of watching another movie. And we saw Singing in the Rain, Citizen Kane, Seventh Seal. I can't remember every movie, unfortunately, but it was every classic. The Virginian, I remember, is one. I'm trying to remember. It was like every genre.
Yeah.
And I still remember that class. I still remember every movie. And I had never seen those movies before that class. And I'm still grateful that I had that class. I needed to see those movies. Now, we are living in a world with the internet, YouTube, and TCM. But
you still self-select.
Right.
You're in your cocoon.
You need a curator.
If you don't know the stuff's out there.
You need a curator. You need someone who's going to show you what this is, why it is, and why you need to see it. And how we got to where we are today. The students, they all know the latest movie from, Pixar. They know the latest movie from Leica, who did Coraline, and Kubo, which is the more recent one they did.
I heard that was wonderful, but I haven't seen it.
It's really good. Yeah. And how did we get there? And I'll just take the example of Kubo or the stop motion films. And one or more of my classes are about stop motion animation and the history of George Powell, Willis O'Brien, Gumby, everything that led us to Rankin Bass, everything that led us to where we are today with stop motion, which is more prevalent now than it ever has been. There's more stop motion movies and TV series than ever in my life.
Although nothing as good as Davy and Goliath.
No.
I'm just
Davy, God told me so, Davy.
we had a pretty weird childhood, but go on.
Yes. No, but I mean, I still think of the films that blew my mind, that got me into it as a teenager. I mean, I remember seeing The Three Caballeros. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was like, if you've ever seen that movie, it has no plot. It's just what it is it's a celebration of South America. That's what it is. Yeah. That's the nice way of saying it's a psychedelic, trippy mind F of crazy visions that have to do with, somehow tied to South America. And I saw that as a kid, like in the 70s when everybody was smoking and there was a private screening somewhere, and you could smell the weed when you walked in the room, and everybody's high, and then they're gonna run some Betty Boop cartoons after that. I'm like cartoons, and then I'm reading Underground. I'm reading R. Crumb, whose stuff looks like 1930s cartoons. Yeah, you know, he's very influenced by the comics he read and the old animators, and that was my world. I love this world that existed on screen. That was another place. And I never got into drugs. I was never a drug guy. I mean, people today don't know. You may know. I'm not sure how old you are, but in the 70s, everybody was taking drugs. I mean, it's just like you read about this and it's hard to believe, but everybody was stoned in the 70s.
Which explains
much. Everything. Explains all the fashions and the hair. But to see these movies then, and I remember I was like Square. I was into comic books and I was now getting into cartoons, and my attitude was I used Three Caballeros as my touchstone. I would say, if you can tell me that a drug is as cool as this, that I'm going to see this in smoke, and then everything's going to look like that, I will smoke it. But it only existed in these movies, you know, these fantastic movies. And to show them to today's generation who has never seen them is a pleasure. Is literally a pleasure. When I teach, it's the most fun thing I do. It's the most satisfying, fun. I love talking to the students afterward. I love reading. I make them do response papers where they just tell me what we saw. They talk about it, and some of them are great papers. I mean, I'm this close to posting them on my blog because they're so much fun. And I get in the Cal Arts, we have costume design students, and so they'll write about Cinderella. If I showed this from the point of view of the costume designs in Cinderella, like that's a great article, you know.
Are the students coming in mainly as potential animators, or is it more broad?
Most of my students in both schools are animators or coming in as animators, but both schools allow other disciplines to take the course.
Yes, I wonder if more liberal arts guys come in.
In the case of Cal Arts, it's all it's anything from songwriting to set building to whatever, and they all have their own perspective on looking at these movies, and I'm learning from them. Yeah, so it's great.
Cool. Anything you're looking forward to in terms of reading?
Ooh, I haven't given that any thought, and I can't think
any cartoons you're looking forward to.
Well, we've got a great year coming up as far as the feature. Yeah. I have a fascination with feature animation. That's why I did that book. I don't know why I have a fascination with it. I think it's because I think in the big picture of things, we're still in an early phase with feature animation. Animated shorts have been around for over 100 years. Feature animation has been around since. Well, there's been features in the 20s and all that, but with Disney, Disney and Snow White from the late 30s on. But Disney's domination of the feature market for almost 50 years, everybody, if you made a knockoff feature, if you made a feature, you know, before 1990, it was a knockoff Disney kind of a film. Even American Tail.
Yeah,
you know?
Everything had that same.
That's why that's why the few that weren't, things like Yellow Submarine and Fritz the Cat really stand out. But everything else was some kind of either it was a television show like Yogi Bear or Peanuts, or it was some kind of a Disney fairy tale that wasn't done by Disney. And so we were stifled by what I call the stigma of Disney. Animation features were stifled by it. That's why I think anime features, the Japanese ones, are fascinating because they also didn't follow the Disney formula.
It's the same thing when reading Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics back in the early 90s, and where he really starts breaking down how manga work in terms of the panel transitions and other stuff. And it's like, oh, if you don't have, what we had as comics in the West as your template,
right,
you might go in a completely different direction,
right?
And yeah, same thing I assume with the cartooning, with cartoons.
Exactly. So it's taken till now. And even now you can still see plenty of things that are throwbacks to the way things used to be or Disney type features, but we're beginning to, in the last 10, 15 years, go in some new areas. The Secret of Kells you mentioned. This film's coming out of Europe. Like I said, stop motion. I just saw Early Man, the new Aardman film.
Oh, yeah.
The people who did Wallace and Gromit. Great movie. They did. By the way, if anybody hasn't seen Shaun the Sheep, sounds silly.
It's amazing, and I haven't seen it.
It is hilarious, and it is the closest thing to a modern-day silent comedy, perfect silent comedy that you'll ever see. And there's no dialogue in it. You got to see the movie. But Early Man is excellent, and this is a great year. We've got Wes Anderson again coming back with Isle of Dogs, and we've got Brad Bird coming back with a sequel to The Incredibles, which was an incredible film, the first one. So we've got a really amazing year coming up. I'm not even naming half of them. A lot to look forward to, and animation is incredibly exciting.
Sounds good. Jerry Beck, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memories Show.
My pleasure.
And that was Jerry Beck. His main website is cartoonresearch.com, which is spelled just like it sounds. He's published more than a dozen books, and you can find those in better bookstores and online, and he mentions a few of them during our conversation. He's also the editor of animationscoop.com, which is also spelled just like it sounds. The Museum of Modern Art exhibition that he was in New York for is Club 57, Film, Performance, and Art in the East Village, 1978 to 1983. And that's running through April 1st, 2018. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Jerry, so, who are you reading? If you want to hear his answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. The newest episode of that one just went up a little while ago, and it features new material from Shannon Wheeler, Barry Blitt, Martin Rosen, Nicholas Del Banco, Eshkol Nevo, Paul Gravett, Eddie Portnoy, Vanda Kreft, and Cullen Murphy. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. There are all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my new secret project, which I have to get back to work on, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. We recorded this episode at Jerry's apartment in New York City. That was $10 at the GW, $40 for parking because it was a Friday, $6 for the subway, a couple of bucks for coffee at Birch on 13th Street. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Special thanks go out to John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Noah Van Sciver, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Les Camella, Joe Caruso, Paul Karasik, and Michael Janizik for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with, well, either science fiction author Levi Tadar, essayist Willard Spiegelman, or political science professor Adolph Reed Jr. You'll need to come back to find out who you get. Till then, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and tunein.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show or Gil Roth. Give that a shot. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes Store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. That'll help us build a bigger audience. You could also tell people about it. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.